We thought when we saw Khabib, right, that was the complete version of a Russian fighter. Then you see Islam with the striking. I would call Khabib Nurmagomedov the greatest fighter.
They've solved every style in MMA. Strikers, wrestlers,
Khabib catches him.
kickboxers, jiu-jitsu masters.
Good shot there.
Every era, every champion,
From our angle, guys,
every unbeatable system
Look at this punch.
eventually gets figured out, except one. For more than a decade, the UFC has tried, failed, adapted, and failed again. And no one wants to admit it, because this problem isn't just technical, it's cultural, it's generational. It's a system so ruthless, so disciplined, so suffocating, that even the best fighters in the world collapse under it. You've seen it happen. Unbeaten world-class strikers mauled before. And yet the question everyone keeps avoiding is the one that matters most. Why can't anyone solve Dagestani wrestling? Is it the technique, the upbringing, the mindset, or is the truth far more uncomfortable? That the UFC has finally found a style it cannot prepare its fighters for. Today, we're going to uncover the answer. And once you understand where this comes from, you'll see why no cage, no camp, no strategy can prepare you for it. And it isn't just one fighter. We watched Khabib Nurmagomedov retire undefeated, 29-0, never truly hurt, never truly threatened. We watched Islam Makhachev take the lightweight belt and turn elite fighters into exhausted, confused versions of themselves. We watched Khamzat Chimaev rip through contenders like gravity didn't apply to him, making seasoned veterans look like they'd never grappled before. 3 different fighters, 3 different weights, same result. So the real question isn't why they win, it's why everyone else loses. And to understand that, you have to go back to where this all began, because this dominance didn't start in a gym. It didn't start with one coach or one training camp. It started in the mountains of Dagestan, in a place where wrestling isn't a sport, it's survival. Dagestan sits wedged between the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, a republic in southern Russia where winter is brutal and the terrain is unforgiving. This isn't a place that produces fighters by accident. This is a place that has been forging warriors for centuries. Long before MMA existed, Dagestani children were learning to wrestle before they could read. Not in polished academies with soft mats and structured curriculums, on concrete, on dirt, in freezing gyms with broken windows and no heat. Wrestling in Dagestan isn't recreation, it's identity, it's honor. Every village has a wrestling club. Every father pushes his child into the sport by age 5, sometimes younger. And the training isn't gentle, it's relentless. Kids sparring with older, stronger opponents. Competitions that feel more like street fights than tournaments. There's no trophy culture here. You win or you learn why you lost, and then you train harder. This is the environment that builds Dagestani fighters. Not talent, not genetics, environment, and a culture that believes losing is worse than injury. But environment alone doesn't explain why the UFC can't solve this style. What Dagestan had that no one else did was an architect, a man who saw the future of combat sports before anyone else and built a system designed to dominate it. His name was Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. And he didn't just create champions, he created a blueprint that changed MMA forever. Abdulmanap wasn't a former UFC fighter. He was a military combat instructor, a decorated athlete in Sambo and Judo, and a man obsessed with discipline. He believed that talent was a trap, that natural ability made fighters lazy, and that true greatness came from structure, suffering, and strategy. So he designed a system that blended freestyle wrestling, Judo, and Sambo into one seamless, suffocating style. He trained his fighters like soldiers, 4 to 6 hours a day, every day, no exceptions. Mountain runs with weighted stones strapped to their backs, sparring sessions that didn't stop until someone quit. And he didn't just train their bodies, he trained their minds. Abdulmanap demanded humility. He demanded respect. He demanded that his fighters become scholars of the sport, not studied opponents for months, breaking down their tendencies, their weaknesses, their psychological breaking points. And he passed that knowledge down to every fighter he coached. By the time Khabib entered the UFC, he wasn't just a wrestler. He was the product of a 2-decade experiment in combat engineering. And when Abdulmanap died in 2020, the system didn't die with him. It spread. Islam Makhachev, Umar Nurmagomedov, Usman Nurmagomedov, Islam's camp in Dagestan, they all carry the blueprint forward. And that's why this problem isn't going away. But Abdulmanap didn't just create a style. He created a mindset that the UFC still can't break, because Dagestani fighters don't fight the way Western fighters do. They don't fight to win rounds. They don't fight for highlights or viral moments. They fight to break you, mentally first then physically. Khabib said it himself, "I don't come to fight, I come to make them quit." And that philosophy runs through every fighter from that region. There's no ego, no trash talk that matters, no emotion in the cage. They're calm, patient, methodical. They don't panic when they get hit. They don't celebrate when they land. They just keep coming. And that terrifies people, because most fighters are used to emotional warfare. They're used to stare downs and head games and adrenaline-fueled chaos. But Dagestani fighters operate like they're doing a job. And the job is to make you realize, round by round, minute by minute, that you can't stop them. That's not coaching, that's cultural psychology. In Dagestan, wrestling is honor, losing is shame, and shame is something you carry for life. So these fighters grow up with a belief system that says quitting isn't an option, losing isn't acceptable, and every fight is a test of who you are as a man. The UFC has world-class athletes. Dagestan has warriors raised in combat. And that difference shows every single time. And this mindset works because the system underneath it is something MMA simply wasn't prepared for. Most fighters train one base and add pieces from other styles. Strikers learn takedown defense. Wrestlers add striking. Jiu-jitsu players work their cardio. But Dagestani fighters aren't adding techniques. They're blending entire martial arts into chains that never stop. This is what makes their wrestling unsolvable. It's not one takedown. It's 15 attempts in 15 seconds. If the single leg fails, they switch to a high crotch. If that fails, they trip you. If you stay up, they cage cut and try again, and again, and again. They don't give you space to recover. They don't give you time to think. The pressure is constant. And this is the part no striker understands until it's too late. Because it's not wild, it's technical. Every movement has a counter built in. Every position flows into the next. This is chain wrestling at its highest level, and it's why strikers panic. Strikers are used to distance management, timing, rhythm, but Dagestani fighters collapse that space instantly. They make the cage feel small. They make 5 minutes feel like an hour. And once they get you down, the real nightmare begins. Their top control is suffocating. They don't go for quick submissions. They don't scramble recklessly. They pin you, flatten you out, and make you carry their weight while they land short, methodical strikes that drain your energy and your will. Islam Makhachev against Charles Oliveira was a perfect example. And Charles, one of the most decorated grapplers in UFC history, couldn't get up. That's not strength, that's system. And the system is something no one else trains. But if the system is so powerful, why hasn't anyone adapted to beat it? This is where the uncomfortable truth lives, because the problem isn't that UFC fighters don't understand what's happening. The problem is they can't replicate the preparation. Most American wrestlers begin the sport in high school, maybe middle school. Dagestani fighters start at 5 years old. By the time they're 18, they have over a decade of mat time, competition experience, and a deep understanding of body mechanics that you can't teach in a crash course. You can't close a 13-year gap in a training camp. And even elite MMA camps don't have rooms full of Sambo black belts and judo throwers who also wrestle at an international level. Dagestani fighters grow up training with other killers. Every day, every session, iron sharpens iron. In the West, elite fighters often dominate their training partners. In Dagestan, there are no easy rounds. Then there's identity conflict. A kickboxer isn't going to abandon their striking to become a wrestler. A jiu-jitsu player isn't going to stop pulling guard to learn chain wrestling. But Dagestani fighters don't have that conflict. They're grapplers first, and everything else is secondary. They're willing to look boring. They're willing to grind. They're willing to win ugly. And that mentality gives them an edge most fighters won't accept. Western gyms don't spar the same way either. In the US, sparring is often technical, controlled, playful even. In Dagestan, sparring is war. They go hard. They go long. They break each other down mentally, because that's the only way to prepare for someone trying to do it to you in the cage. And finally, the Dagestani system is generational. These fighters inherit game plans, strategies, and 20 years of collective knowledge. UFC fighters are individuals trying to solve a system. Dagestani fighters are a system trying to overwhelm individuals. But if no one can solve it, does that mean Dagestan will rule forever? Not necessarily, because there are fighters who've come close, fighters who've shown that the style isn't invincible, just extremely difficult to break. Arman Tsarukyan gave Islam Makhachev one of his toughest fights early in both their careers, using lateral movement and scrambles to neutralize some of the chain wrestling. Alexander Volkanovski survived against Islam longer than anyone expected, showing that world-class cardio and mental toughness can slow the system down, even if it doesn't stop it. And there's a blueprint forming. Fighters are starting to realize that you can't out-wrestle a Dagestani fighter using their rules. You have to change the fight entirely. That means constant lateral movement to avoid the cage. That means powerful counter striking to make them respect distance. That means elite jiu-jitsu from bad positions, not relying on guard, but attacking from back takes and scrambles. It means training with Dagestani-style sparring partners, which more gyms are finally starting to do. But here's the catch. Even as the UFC adapts, Dagestan keeps evolving. A new generation is already here. Umar Nurmagomedov is undefeated and climbing the bantamweight rankings. Usman Nurmagomedov holds the Bellator lightweight title. Magomed Ankalaev is a monster at light heavyweight. Shara Magomedov is gaining attention. And there are dozens more coming through the system right now, training in the same camps, learning the same blueprint, carrying forward the same mentality. So while the UFC is finally starting to understand the problem is getting deeper. And that's what makes this so fascinating, because Dagestan didn't just take belts, they changed the sport. Right now, gyms across the world are trying to build Dagestani-style training camps. Fighters are hiring Sambo coaches, they're studying chain wrestling, they're drilling mat returns and cage control. The entire MMA meta is shifting because of this one region, and that's how you know a style is truly dominant, when it doesn't just win fights, but forces everyone else to evolve around it. MMA has always been a sport of problem solving. Royce Gracie introduced jiu-jitsu, and everyone learned submissions. Chuck Liddell perfected counter wrestling, and everyone learned takedown defense. Anderson Silva showed what elite striking could do, and everyone improved their hands. The sport evolves by identifying what works and forcing athletes to adapt or die. But Dagestani wrestling is different because it's not just a technique you can learn. It's a lifetime of preparation, a culture of discipline, and a mindset forged in one of the harshest environments on earth. You can study it, you can respect it, but you can't replicate it in 8 weeks. So whether the UFC ever truly solves this problem depends on something no one is talking about. It depends on whether a fighter will emerge who was raised in a similar system, someone who started grappling at 5 years old, who trained in rooms full of killers, who internalized the same discipline, the same work ethic, the same belief that losing is unacceptable. Maybe that fighter exists in Dagestan's next generation. Maybe they're training in Brazil or Russia or America right now. Or maybe the uncomfortable truth is that the UFC has entered an era where one region, one system, and one philosophy are simply better than everything else. And if that's the case, then we're not watching dominance, we're watching evolution. Because Dagestani wrestling isn't a phase, it's not a trend, it's the new standard. And until someone matches that standard, the question won't be who wins, it'll be how long until they break. So why can't anyone solve Dagestani wrestling? Because it isn't a style, it's a lifetime, it's a culture, it's a system built across generations, in a place where combat isn't entertainment, it's survival. It's the product of 20 years of one man's vision and 1,000 years of warrior tradition. And until the rest of the world is willing to match that commitment, to endure that suffering, to adopt that mindset, the cage will belong to Dagestan. The real question now isn't whether someone will solve it, it's whether you're ready to accept that some problems don't have solutions. Some problems just have survivors. So who do you think can finally crack this code? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this. And don't miss what we're breaking down next, because the sport is changing, and we're just getting started.